Tajan laughed. Not a soft laugh. Not the laugh of a man caught off guard. It was the laugh of someone who had never once believed the person standing in front of him was capable of surprising him. Low, dismissive, the kind of sound a man makes when he's already decided the conversation is beneath him. He stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, their master bedroom, in a charcoal dress shirt with the top two buttons open, and he looked at his wife the way a person looks at a minor inconvenience, a delayed flight, a slow elevator, something to wait out. Behind him, Yun Seora stood at the vanity mirror in a silk robe the color of arterial red, pressing Nia's late mother's diamond earrings into her ears like she owned them. Like she owned all of it. Nia Holloway did not scream. She did not cry. She stood in the hallway of the home she had quietly held in trust for 11 years, still wearing her coat from the airport, her carry-on bag at her feet, and she watched the woman wearing her mother's jewelry adjust her reflection in the mirror. And she felt something she had not expected to feel in that moment. Clarity. If you have ever stood at the exact moment your life cracked open, not dramatically, not with fire or noise, but with the quiet, irreversible sound of something finally breaking, then you already know what Nia felt standing in that hallway. This is her story. And it does not end where Tajan expected it to. Before we go further, if you are watching this for the first time, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Stories like this one, about power, betrayal, and the women men underestimate until it is far too late, are exactly what we bring you every week. Drop a like and tell us in the comments what city or country you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Nia Holloway had not planned to come home 2 days early. The Singapore meetings wrapped faster than expected. A deal that was supposed to require 3 rounds of negotiation collapsed gracefully into one. Her counterpart, a soft-spoken Singaporean financier named David Goh, had done his homework, respected her time, and signed where she needed him to sign. By 7 that evening, she was in a car headed to Changi Airport with a glass of sparkling water in her hand and 3 hours to spare before her rescheduled flight. She did not call Tajan to say she was coming home early. She had stopped doing that years ago, not from suspicion, but from habit. Tajan never called her when his plans changed. He simply appeared or he didn't, and over 8 years of marriage, Nia had absorbed that rhythm into her own. She moved quietly. She changed plans without announcement. She had learned to take up less space than she actually occupied. That would prove to be the thing Tajan never thought to be afraid of. The waterfront estate sat on the edge of the Puget Sound, surrounded by Douglas fir and a long private drive that cost more per foot than most people's monthly rent. From the outside, it looked exactly like what Tajan wanted it to look like. Enormous, secured, unreachable. The kind of property that communicated without speaking. The kind of home that told every person who passed its gates exactly who they were dealing with. It had always been Nia's, not in the way Tajan understood it. Not titled in her name, not registered to her directly, because Nia had learned a long time ago that direct was not always the most effective direction. The estate sat inside Holloway Meridian Trust, a legal structure her late father had built before she was 30, and that she had quietly expanded in the years since. Tajan knew the trust existed. He had signed documents referencing it during their early years together. He had simply never cared enough to read what he was signing with the full weight of comprehension. He thought it was paperwork. Nia's paperwork. The kind of administrative scaffolding a wealthy woman from a distinguished family accumulated the way other people accumulated furniture. He had never once considered that it was a foundation. She rode the elevator up from the private garage, rolling her carry-on behind her, and she noticed things the moment the doors opened. She noticed them not because she was looking for them, but because Nia Holloway was a woman who had trained herself to read rooms the way some people read faces, automatically, in layers, picking up what other people's eyes skipped over. The living room had been used, not drastically, but the throw pillows on the left sectional were stacked differently than how the housekeeper arranged them. There was a champagne coupe on the side table that Tajan would not have used alone. He was a Scotch drinker. Neat, never iced, never in a flute. The shoes near the entry were not hers. A woman's shoes. High-heeled, Italian, expensive, placed neatly enough to suggest the person wearing them was comfortable, not hiding. Nia stood in the entry for a moment. She breathed. Then she walked down the hall. The crimson robe was hanging on the outside of the bedroom door. It was the first thing she saw. That slash of red against the pale wood, vivid and careless, the way things are left when the person leaving them has decided they belong there. Nia touched the fabric with 2 fingers. It was not her robe. She did not own anything this color. She had never liked the way it photographed. She pushed the door open. Seora was at the vanity with her back half turned, tilting her head to secure the second earring. She was dressed for an evening out, hair done, face done, the robe worn open over what appeared to be a cocktail dress she had not yet fully put on. The picture of a woman at ease in her own bedroom. Except it was not her bedroom. Taejin was on the far side of the room, near the window, checking something on his phone. He looked up when the door opened, and for 1/2 second his face ran through something, surprise, calculation, irritation, and landed on irritation, not guilt, irritation. "You're back early," he said. That was it. That was the greeting. No question about her flight, no move toward her. His tone was the tone of a man whose evening had been interrupted by something he considered an administrative problem. Seora turned from the mirror. She did not apologize or reach for the robe to close it. She looked at Nia with an expression that sat somewhere between wariness and defiance, as if she had already thought through this moment and decided to meet it standing. Nia looked at the earrings. Her mother's earrings. Oval-cut diamonds in platinum settings, left to Nia in a jewelry box wrapped in a handwritten note. She had worn them twice, once to her mother's memorial service and once to a charity dinner 2 years later. She kept them in the upper left drawer of the vanity, inside a velvet pouch. Seora was wearing them because she had gone through the drawer. Nia felt the clarity sharpen inside her chest. Not rage, not grief. Something colder and more organized than either of those things. "Take those off," she said. Her voice was completely level. Seora looked at Taejin. Taejin looked at Nia. "Let's not make this into something theatrical," he said. "You know how the work goes. She was here for a late strategy session, and it got—" "Take them off," Nia said again. She was still looking at Seora. She had not moved from the doorway. Something in Nia's stillness communicated what her words did not. Seora reached up and unclipped the earrings. She set them on the vanity surface without comment. Nia walked to the vanity, picked them up, and put them in her coat pocket. Then she walked back to the door. Taejin crossed his arms. The irritation had shifted into something more like management. The way he looked when he was deciding how to contain a situation before it became visible to the wrong people. "Where are you going?" "I'm leaving." "It's 11 o'clock at night." "Yes." "Nia." His voice dropped. The control voice. The one he used when he wanted someone to understand that the conversation was ending on his terms. "You're not going to do something irrational right now. We'll talk in the morning." "We will not." She picked up her carry-on from where she had set it in the hallway. She had not unpacked a single thing, had not taken off her coat. "You're going to walk out with one suitcase." He said it like it was the punchline to something. "Where exactly do you think you're going with one suitcase?" Nia stopped at the end of the hall. She looked back at him once, and what he saw in her face was not what he expected. He had expected tears or fury or the particular expression of a woman preparing to bargain. He had spent 8 years watching powerful people negotiate under pressure, and he believed he could read the position a person was in by the look in their eyes. What he saw in Nia's eyes was not a position. It was an exit. "Somewhere you don't own," she said, and she left. The drive into Seattle took 40 minutes in light traffic. Nia sat in the back of a car she had requested through her own account, not the household service Taejin managed, and she did not cry during those 40 minutes. She had expected to. She had assumed that once the door closed behind her and she was alone with the dark water and the highway lights, the structural numbness would crack open and whatever was underneath it would surface. It didn't. What came instead was something quieter and more complex. A kind of low-grade exhaustion that she recognized as the feeling of a body that had been holding a position for a very long time, finally being told it was allowed to shift. She had loved Taejin. She wanted to be accurate about that, even now, even in the privacy of her own mind. The man she had fallen in love with at a private investment conference in Seoul 11 years ago had been precise and direct and genuinely curious about her work in a way that felt real. He had asked her questions that most men didn't ask. Questions about structure and strategy, and how she thought about risk at the institutional level. and she had answered them honestly because it had felt, for the first time in her adult life, like being seen by someone operating at her own altitude. She had married him 14 months after that conference. She had spent the 8 years following the wedding quietly absorbing the distance between the man she had married and the man he had decided to become. The car stopped in front of a building in downtown Seattle with no signage on the exterior. A glass and steel tower that from the street appeared to be a corporate address. The penthouse had been hers for 6 years, not registered in her name, but held, like everything else she owned of consequence, inside a structure that did not invite casual scrutiny. She took the private elevator. She let herself in. The space was clean, contemporary, and entirely without Tae-jin. That was the thing she noticed first, before the view of the city, before the familiar arrangement of her own objects on the shelves, the absence of him. The absence of the particular weight of a man who moved through rooms like he expected them to rearrange themselves. She sat on the couch without turning on the overhead lights. She took the earrings out of her coat pocket and held them in her palm. Her mother had given her a great deal of advice over the years, most of it practical. Her mother was a woman who had built real things, actual institutions, a law firm, a women's foundation, a trust structure that had outlasted her by 8 years, and would outlast Nia if Nia did things correctly. She was not a woman given to sentiment, but she had pressed those earrings into Nia's hands with a kind of deliberateness that went beyond jewelry. "These are for the moments," her mother had said, "when you need to remember that you are not alone in what you carry." Nia looked at the diamonds in her palm. She had known, somewhere beneath the part of her that wanted things to work, that this was coming. Not the specific scene, not the red robe, not the specific woman, but the collision. The moment when Tae-jin's particular form of carelessness would finally become impossible to insulate from. She had believed, for too long, that her silence was the same as patience. It had not been patience. It had been waiting. And she had, in the years of that waiting, done things Tae-jin had never thought to notice. She had restructured. She had repositioned. She had converted quiet influence into documented control, one careful transaction at a time, until the thing she held was not just her own wealth, but a significant portion of his, held in her hands with instruments he had signed and forgotten, through entities he had never traced back to their origin. She was not a vindictive woman, but she was a prepared one. She put the earrings on the side table, stood up, and went to the kitchen to make tea. Her phone rang at 1 in the morning. She looked at the screen. Not Tae-jin. His pride would hold out longer than an hour. She knew that. It was Malcolm Vance, her attorney, calling from a number she had given him only for specific situations. She answered. "He's been making calls," Malcolm said. His voice was unhurried, but that was Malcolm. He delivered catastrophes at the same tempo he delivered lunch orders. "Starting about 20 minutes after you left the estate. His attorney called mine at 12:40. "What's his position?" "His position is that you're upset and this is a temporary situation and you should return to discuss it privately rather than allowing it to become something that requires external management." Nia held the phone and said nothing for a moment. "Set the review in motion," she said. A brief silence on Malcolm's end. Not hesitation. Malcolm Vance had not hesitated in 30 years of practice. Just the pause of a man confirming internally that his client was doing exactly what she had outlined she would do in the event of exactly this situation. "Understood," he said. "Full governance review on the legitimate portfolio. Starting point, the Black Harbor development financing." "Starting point," Nia confirmed. "He won't see it coming from that direction," Malcolm said. "No," Nia agreed. "He won't." She hung up, finished making her tea, and stood at the window looking at the city lights reflecting off the water. Tae-jin had spent 8 years believing that she lived inside his empire. He had never once turned around to look at the foundation beneath his feet. That was the thing about certain powerful men. They spent so much energy watching the horizon for threats that they forgot to look down at the ground they were standing on. And in that oversight, in that enormous, arrogant oversight, they created the conditions for the only kind of loss they never saw coming. The loss that arrived quietly. The loss that had already happened before they realized it had begun. Nia drank her tea. She was not happy. She wanted to be honest about that too. Happy was not the word for standing at a window at 1 in the morning with your mother's earrings on the side table and your marriage on the floor behind you. What she was, what she had always been, even in the hardest stretches of the last 8 years, was clear. And clarity, she had learned long before she ever met Kwon Tae-jin, was its own kind of power. Outside, Seattle hummed beneath its nighttime skin, indifferent and enormous. Somewhere across the city, in the estate he had always called his, Tae-jin was about to make his first phone call to his legal team. He was about to start discovering that the woman he had dismissed from the bedroom with one suitcase and a cold laugh had left something behind. Not by accident, not out of grief or impulse, by design. Tae-jin did not sleep. He would not have admitted that to anyone. Not to his attorney, not to the two men who ran his security detail, not to the woman who had stayed in the guest room down the hall after Nia left, and who had been smart enough to remain silent for the rest of the night. He lay on top of the covers in the dark with his phone on his chest, and he stared at the ceiling and he listened to the house. It was a different house without Nia in it. He had not expected that. He had expected silence, and there was silence, but it was the wrong kind. Not the quiet of a home at rest, but the quiet of a space that had registered an absence and did not know what to do with it. The waterfront outside moved and shifted the way it always did. The security lights swept the property on their 30-second rotation. Everything was exactly as it had been at midnight, and nothing felt even remotely the same. He told himself it was the disruption, the unexpected variable. He was a man who managed complexity for a living, criminal and corporate both, and an unexpected variable in the domestic arrangement was simply a thing to be managed, contained, and resolved before it created secondary damage. That was what he told himself at 2 a.m. By 3, he was sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of scotch he had barely touched, going through the sequence of the evening in his head for the 4th time. Not because he felt guilty. He had examined that possibility and set it aside with the same efficiency he applied to most uncomfortable things. What he was examining was the look on Nia's face when she had said she was leaving. That look. He had been watching people negotiate under pressure for 15 years. He knew what desperation looked like dressed in composure. He knew the difference between a person who was leaving and a person who was performing leaving as a tactic to reopen on better terms. What he had seen in Nia's face was neither of those things. He poured the scotch down the sink and went to his office. By 5 a.m, he had called his attorney twice and his chief financial officer once. The attorney, a lean, meticulous Korean-American named Raymond Cho, had answered the second call with the resigned professionalism of a man who had been retained specifically for nights like this. Raymond did not ask what had happened. He asked what Tae-jin needed. "Find out if she's made any legal moves in the last 48 hours, Tae-jin said. "Anything filed, anything initiated." "It's been less than 6 hours since she left the property," Raymond said carefully. "I know what time it is." A pause. "I'll have something by 9. Tae-jin hung up. Then he sat with the phone in his hand and thought about the trust. Holloway Meridian Trust. He had signed things referencing it. He remembered that much. Early in the marriage, documents that Malcolm Vance had produced and explained in the patient, slightly condescending way that old money attorneys explained things to people they considered new money adjacent. Tae-jin had read the summaries, not the full documents. He had been building 3 new businesses simultaneously at that point, and he did not have the bandwidth, he told himself, to dig into the structural details of his wife's family inheritance. He tried to remember the specifics now and found that he couldn't. That was the first time, sitting in his office at 5 a.m. with the city going gray outside the window, that something cold and specific moved through his chest. Seora knocked on the office door at 7:15. She was dressed, fully, professionally, as if she had somewhere to be. Her hair was arranged and her face was composed, and she had the look of a woman who had decided the best strategy in a difficult situation was to project forward motion. Tae-jin looked at her from behind his desk. "I need to go," she said. "I have a client meeting at 9. "Sit down." She sat. The chair across from his desk was not a comfortable chair. He had chosen it deliberately over the years, the same way he chose every object in that office deliberately. He looked at her, and she met his eyes and held them, which was one of the things he had always found compelling about her. Seora did not look away. "You went through her things," he said. Something moved across Seora's face. Not guilt. She and guilt were not well acquainted, more like recalibration. "The earrings were in the vanity. I was looking for—" "I don't want to know what you were looking for." His voice was quiet. That was the voice Raymond Cho had once told a junior associate to be most afraid of. Not the loud voice, not the controlled voice, but the quiet one that meant the decision had already been made. Those were her mother's. I didn't know that. You didn't ask. Seora looked at her hands for a moment, then she looked back up. Taejin. She was going to find out eventually. The way we've been. The trips, the dinners. You're not invisible. She walked out with one suitcase. People come back. Not the way she left. He said it before he fully understood why he was saying it, and the certainty in his own voice surprised him. He looked at the window. Get your things from the guest room. I'll have someone call you a car. The silence that followed had a particular texture, the kind that comes when a person expected a different fight and has to reorient. That's it? Seora said. That's it. She stood. She picked up her bag from the floor beside the chair, and she looked at him one more time with something in her expression that he could not be bothered to fully read. Then she walked out. He listened to her footsteps down the hall, the distant sound of the guest room door, the particular silence that followed. 20 minutes later, the front door closed. Taejin did not move from behind his desk. Raymond Cho arrived at 9:30 with a legal pad and a face that had shed whatever optimism it might have started the morning with. He sat across the desk and placed the legal pad face down, which was the first bad sign. Raymond only flipped legal pads over when the information on them was the kind he wanted to be able to control the delivery of. Talk, Taejin said. The trust structure is more comprehensive than you were likely aware of, Raymond began. How comprehensive? Raymond turned the legal pad over. He had written 3 columns of notes in his small, compressed handwriting. He looked at the first column. The estate is held entirely within Holloway Meridian Trust. There is no joint ownership, no community property claim that applies to the physical structure. The property was transferred into the trust 7 years before your marriage, and the deed has not been amended since. Taejin said nothing. The trust's controlling trustee, Raymond continued, is Nia Holloway, not Nia Kwan. She never legally changed her surname in the trust documentation. She changed her name when we married, socially, not in the trust. Raymond moved to the second column. I also flagged a separate entity, Obsidian Meridian Holdings, that appears in the acquisition history of 3 of your legitimate holding companies. The equity positions are significant. I'm still pulling the full picture, but the initial figure I have is somewhere in the range of 36 to 40% of the legitimate corporate portfolio. The room went very still. Taejin looked at Raymond. Who controls Obsidian Meridian? Raymond met his eyes. We're still tracing the layered structure, but the registered agent trails to a firm that has represented the Holloway family exclusively for its Nia. Raymond did not confirm it, and he did not deny it. He moved to the third column. There's more. Tell me. Black Harbor. Taejin went rigid across the shoulders, just slightly, just enough for Raymond, who had known him for 9 years, to notice. Black Harbor was the project. The centerpiece. A waterfront development covering a hotel, casino, marina, and entertainment complex that was supposed to be the thing that moved Taejin's legitimate empire from significant to defining. The project he had spent 3 years architecting and 18 months in active development. What about it? Taejin said flatly. The primary financing vehicle for Black Harbor runs through a credit facility that Obsidian Meridian Holdings co-guarantees. Raymond set the legal pad down. If Obsidian withdraws its guarantee position, the facility triggers a review clause. Development would halt pending refinancing. Taejin stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the Puget Sound was flat and gray under a low sky, moving the way water moves when the weather hasn't decided what it's going to do yet. He looked at it for a long time. How long has this been in place? He said. The Obsidian position in your holding companies dates back approximately 6 years. The Black Harbor co-guarantee was structured into the financing 18 months ago. 6 years. 6 years Nia had held an equity stake in the legitimate empire he spent his working hours believing was entirely his own. 6 years she had sat across dinner tables and attended the functions and listened to him describe his expansion plans as if she were an interested audience and not a structural participant. He turned from the window. Get me a full picture by end of day, he said. Everything, every entity, every holding, every position. I want to know what she controls and how she controls it. That's going to take time. The structure is deliberately complex. Then start now. Raymond picked up his legal pad and stood. He was halfway to the door when Tae-jin spoke again. Did she file anything? Raymond stopped. Not yet, but Malcolm Vance's office logged a request this morning for complete financial documentation on the Black Harbor development. That request came through the oversight provision that Obsidian Meridian holds under the co-guarantee. Tae-jin absorbed this. She's not filing, he said slowly. She's auditing. It appears so. The distinction hit him with the full weight of its implications. Filing was emotion. Auditing was strategy. Get me out of this meeting, Tae-jin said. Whatever I have at 11, cancel it. You have the harbor contractors at 11. They flew in from... Cancel it. Raymond left. The call came at 10:40. Not from Nia. He had not expected it from Nia. She had never been someone who picked up a ringing phone when the other option was making the other person come to the silence and sit with it. The call came from Daniel Park, the chief financial officer of KTJ Holdings, Tae-jin's principal legitimate corporate entity, and Daniel's voice had the particular flattened quality that people's voices get when they are delivering information they wish someone else had been assigned to deliver. I got a documentation request this morning, Daniel said, through the Obsidian provision. They want 6 quarters of Black Harbor expenditure records, line items, project expense categorization, the full supplier chain. Tae-jin gripped the phone. Who signed the request? It came through Malcolm Vance's office. I don't have a name on the signatory. Process it. Sir, process it, Daniel. A beat of silence. The thing is, Daniel said carefully, some of the expense categorizations in the Black Harbor records, specifically the Q3 and Q4 filings from last year, there are categories that might not survive a detailed external review without additional context. The coldness moved through Tae-jin's chest again. Slower this time. More specific. What categories, he said, though some part of him already knew. Corporate entertainment, executive travel, client hospitality. Daniel's voice was absolutely neutral. The voice of a man reading from a document and divorcing himself entirely from what the document said. Some of those line items, if someone were to cross-reference the dates against personal scheduling records. Daniel. Yes. How much? The silence lasted 4 seconds. Tae-jin counted them. Preliminary figure, looking at the flagged items across Q2 of last year through Q1 of this year, somewhere in the range of 3.5 to 4 million. Tae-jin sat down. The money had moved through legitimate business accounts. He had allowed himself to believe, that the categorization was defensible. Corporate entertainment was vague enough. Executive travel covered an enormous range of actual travel. Client hospitality had never been a particularly scrutinized line item when the clients were real and the hospitality was real, even if the client in question was also the person receiving the hospitality in a villa in the Maldives for 9 days in October. He had never thought to wonder who was watching those line items. He had never considered that anyone was positioned to watch them who would have both the access and the motivation to look carefully. Don't process the request yet, he said. We're contractually obligated under the co-guarantee provision to 48 hours. I need 48 hours. Another silence. I'll do what I can, Daniel said. He did not sound like a man who believed 48 hours would change anything. Tae-jin called Nia at noon. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was the same as it always was. Composed, briefly warm, efficient. The sound of it landed somewhere unexpected. He did not leave a message. He called again at 12:15. This time, she picked up on the 3rd ring. Nia. He had not planned what to say. That was not his usual way. He was a man who prepared for conversations the way other people prepared for confrontations, with clear objectives and planned exit routes. But he had picked up the phone before the preparation happened. Tae-jin. Her voice gave him nothing, not coldness, not warmth, just his name. We need to talk. We are talking. In person. A brief pause. No. What you're setting in motion, you need to understand what that does. Not just to me, to the people who work inside those companies, to the development that's... I understand exactly what it does, Nia said. I structured the provision. I know every clause. He stopped. You need to come back, he said. And the moment it left his mouth, he heard how it sounded. Not a request, not an apology, an instruction. the same tone he used to redirect subordinates who were moving in the wrong direction. "We can work through this privately. Whatever you need." "What I needed," Nia said, "was a husband who didn't leave another woman's shoes in my foyer." "Nia, I'm going to let you go. Malcolm will be in contact with Raymond by end of day." "Don't do this." "I didn't start it," she said simply. The line went quiet. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long time after that. The call had lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and it had told him everything he needed to know about what he was actually dealing with, which was not a grieving woman making emotional decisions. It was not a temporary reaction that would exhaust itself over 72 hours and return to the negotiating table on his terms. What it was, what he finally fully understood he was facing, was a woman who had been patient for a very long time and had spent that patience building something. He opened his laptop and pulled up the Black Harbor project files. He looked at them for a while with new eyes. Not the eyes of a developer who had built the project from the ground up, but the eyes of someone trying to see it the way an outside examiner would see it. And what he saw, slowly, with the particular discomfort of a man encountering his own blind spots in real time, was not the gleaming development he had been presenting to investors. He saw the environmental liability assessments that had been filed at their most optimistic interpretation. He saw the leveraging ratios that worked elegantly on paper and would require renegotiation the moment any single financing element shifted. He saw the contractual gaps that he had always intended to address in the next revision and had never gotten around to addressing because the project had always felt, to him, like something he could manage forward through momentum and force of will. He saw what an audit was going to find. He closed the laptop. The investor dinner was in 4 days. 37 people. Financiers, board members, executives from 3 different Pacific Rim development groups, 2 men who controlled more legal influence in Seattle than the city council. He had been planning it for 6 weeks. It was supposed to be the event that moved Black Harbor from ambitious proposal to committed enterprise. He had already sent the seating arrangements. Nia's chair was at the table. He had not thought, at the time he sent those arrangements, that there was any version of reality in which that chair would be empty. He had not thought there was any version of reality in which Nia would be doing anything other than what she had always done at his events, present, composed, subtly amplifying his credibility through the straightforward fact of her own. He reached for his phone to call Raymond, and then he stopped. Because it occurred to him, in the quiet of that office with the gray water outside the window, that Raymond was going to tell him to negotiate. Raymond was going to tell him to open a back channel to Malcolm Vance and find the number. The financial figure, the structural concession, the specific thing Nia needed to see on paper before she pulled the obsidian guarantee and let Black Harbor collapse into its own leveraging problem. And Tai Jin, for the first time in 15 years of operating in 2 separate worlds simultaneously, did not know what the number was. He did not know what Nia needed. He had not known, he understood now with a slow and grinding clarity, for longer than he could reasonably account for. He had stopped paying attention to what she needed somewhere in the 4th or 5th year of their marriage, around the time he started confusing her steadiness for complacency and her silence for acceptance. He had looked at a woman who was quietly managing extraordinary complexity and seen, instead, a wife who was handling things efficiently and staying out of his way. He had looked at the foundation of his own house and seen, simply, the floor. Raymond's call came through at 2 in the afternoon. The full picture was taking shape. Obsidian Meridian Holdings held 38% of KTJ Holdings' legitimate equity. The Black Harbor co-guarantee was confirmed. A formal governance review had been requested under the co-guarantee provision. Not optional, not negotiable, contractually initiated. She can seat herself at the board level, Raymond said. Under the co-guarantee review provision, she has the right to request committee formation and independent audit, and if she exercises both, she already has, Tai-Jin said. Raymond went quiet. She called Malcolm Vance last night, not this morning. Tai-Jin looked at the window. She called him from the car. He had spent the last 12 hours believing he was managing a situation that was still in the early stages of escalation. He had been operating on the assumption that he had time, that the institutional inertia of corporate legal processes and the emotional complexity of the situation would give him days, maybe a week, to find his footing before things became irreversible. What he understood now, sitting in the chair in his office with the full weight of 38% landing on his chest, was that Nia had not left with one suitcase out of grief or impulse or the blindness of fresh betrayal. She had left because she was done waiting for the right moment. And the right moment, from where she was standing, had already arrived. The investor dinner was in 4 days, 37 people, his chair at the head of the table, and somewhere across the city, in a penthouse he had walked past 100 times without knowing it was hers, Nia Holloway was sitting down with Malcolm Vance in a leather portfolio and beginning the formal process of showing Quan Tai Jin exactly what the ground beneath his feet had always been made of. The investor dinner was in 4 days. Tae-jin spent the first of those 4 days doing what he had always done when circumstances moved against him. He worked. Not the performative kind of work that powerful men retreat into when they need to look occupied. Actual work. He pulled every document Raymond had flagged, spread them across the conference table in his office, and went through them the way he went through everything that mattered, methodically, without flinching, looking for the seam where pressure could be applied. He found very few seams. What he found instead, page after page, was the accumulated evidence of how thoroughly he had failed to pay attention to the architecture of his own house. The obsidian meridian positions were clean, documented, and exercisable with a precision that told him these agreements had not been drafted in haste. Someone had spent real time on this. Someone had anticipated every counterargument, every exit clause, every provision that a hostile party might reach for in a moment of institutional emergency. He knew who that someone was. He had just never allowed himself to understand what she was capable of. Raymond came back at 4 in the afternoon with a revised figure on the Black Harbor exposure. The co-guarantee wasn't just a financing backstop. It carried a governance trigger that Nia could activate unilaterally, which would suspend Tae-jin's acquisition authority and place all major expenditures above a certain threshold under independent review pending the completion of the audit. "What's the threshold?" Tae-jin asked. $250,000, Raymond said. Tae-jin looked at him. "Dollars," Raymond confirmed, as if there were any ambiguity. "Anything above that requires committee sign-off until the review closes." The Black Harbor investor dinner alone was budgeted at $400,000. Tae-jin leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at Raymond. "Has she activated the trigger?" "Not yet." "Why not?" Raymond chose his words the way a careful man handles something fragile. "My read, and I could be wrong, is that she's giving you the 4 days." "She's not giving me anything. She's not stopping you from having the dinner," Raymond said carefully. "She could activate the trigger today and the dinner collapses. She hasn't done that, which means either she hasn't decided to yet or she wants you to have the dinner for reasons that serve her own position." The second option sat in the room between them like something with weight. Tae-jin thought about it for a long time after Raymond left. The second day, Seora called. He did not want to pick up. He stared at her name on the screen for 4 full rings and answered on the 5th because some part of him understood that whatever she was calling to say, he needed to hear it before the dinner. "I need to tell you something," she said. No greeting. Her voice was stripped of the particular social warmth she usually applied, like a coating over everything. She sounded like a woman who had been sitting with something uncomfortable for 48 hours and had decided that holding it was costing her more than releasing it. "Talk," he said. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, slightly uneven, the rhythm of someone managing their own nerve. "When we started working together," she said, "before any of this, before things became what they became, I had a conversation with someone. About you, about the Black Harbor project, about your plans for the West Coast expansion." Tae-jin went still. "Who?" he said. "A man named Philip Wren. He approached me through a mutual contact in the PR industry about 18 months ago. He said he represented a group of investors who were interested in understanding your expansion trajectory. He wanted insight into your communication strategy, your public positioning, your board relationships." "Seora." "I didn't think it was—" "What did you tell him?" The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. Tae-jin counted every one of them. "I told him about the Black Harbor timeline, the projected financing structure, the environmental assessment approach, the board recruitment strategy." Her voice had gone flat. Not cold, just emptied of the texture that usually lived in it. "I told him about the contractual gaps in the development agreement, the ones you said you'd resolve in the next revision." Tae-jin stood up from his desk. He walked to the window. He stood there with the phone pressed against his ear, and he looked at the water, and he breathed through his nose, and he did not say anything for a long time because the thing moving through him was not simple enough to be called anger. It was something structural, something that required the same quality of attention that load-bearing damage requires. You have to understand exactly what's been compromised before you know what's going to collapse. 18 months ago, he said finally. Yes. That's when the financing was being structured. I didn't know that would matter, she said. And then quieter. I think I didn't want to know. Who is Philip Wren? I looked into him after the other night, after everything. He's a corporate intelligence broker. He's done work for at least 2 of your competitor development groups in the Pacific Northwest. Taejin turned from the window. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the framed architecture rendering on the wall, a glossy conceptual image of Black Harbor in its completed form, the way it was supposed to look 18 months from groundbreaking. Water and glass and ambition rendered in 3 dimensions. The environmental liability assessments, he said slowly, the ones that came back optimistic. I don't know what was done with what I told him, Seora said. I want to be clear about that. I don't know if he shared it, or how, or with whom. But you told a corporate intelligence broker that our environmental assessment approach was optimistic. The silence confirmed it without requiring her to say it again. Why are you telling me this now? He said. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had the particular quality of someone handing something over that they've been carrying alone. Not relief exactly, but the absence of a weight. Because someone called me yesterday, from a financial news desk, asking if I would comment on a developing story about irregularities in the Black Harbor development financing. Taejin's jaw tightened. They knew about the Obsidian Meridian position, she said. They knew the co-guarantee was under review. They knew the expenditure figures from the Q3 and Q4 filings. She stopped. Taejin, I didn't give anyone those figures. Those are internal. He understood what she was saying. The story was coming from somewhere else. Who called you? He said. They left a name. James Whitfield, Pacific Business Review. She paused. I looked him up. He's real. The publication is real. And they have a profile piece running in 4 days. 4 days. The same 4 days as the investor dinner. Taejin put the phone down on the desk without ending the call and stood in the center of his office and looked at the room around him. The documents spread across the conference table, the architecture rendering on the wall, the chair that Raymond had occupied yesterday with his legal pad and his careful delivery of bad news. And he understood, with the particular full-body comprehension that only comes when all the peripheral information finally converges on a single point, that what he was dealing with was not one problem. It was a sequence, a deliberate, precisely timed sequence of events that had been planned and set in motion before Nia ever walked down that hallway and found the crimson robe. He picked the phone back up. I'll be in touch, he said, and ended the call. He stood at his desk for a moment. Then he called Raymond. I need you in the office in an hour, he said. Bring whoever you have on corporate intelligence and pull everything you can find on a Philip Wren, corporate broker, Pacific Northwest, active in the last 2 years. Raymond didn't ask questions. That was what 9 years of retainer bought. Raymond arrived in 50 minutes with a woman named Cass Dunmore, who ran the private intelligence arm of the legal firm, with the discreet efficiency of someone who had built a career out of finding things that other people had tried to make unfindable. She was 40-something, unremarkable in appearance, and had the particular quality of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the long habit of being in rooms where the stakes were high, and the patience was the only tool that actually worked. Taejin laid out what Seora had told him. He did it without commentary, without visible emotion, just the sequence of facts in the order they connected to each other. Cass listened without writing anything down. When he finished, she said, Philip Wren I can confirm. He's done placement work for Dalton Group and for a Portland-based development consortium called Cascadia Ridge. Both of those groups have competing bid interest in the waterfront parcels adjacent to your Black Harbor footprint. So he's working for a competitor, Taejin said. Possibly. Or he's an independent broker who sold the same information to multiple buyers. Cass tilted her head slightly. But the financial news story is a separate issue. the Obsidian Meridian information, and the expenditure figures from your Q3 and Q4 filings. Those are not things a corporate intelligence broker would have access to. Those are internal documents with very limited distribution. Who has access to those documents? Raymond asked. Board level, CFO, my legal team, the co-guarantee holders. Taejin looked at the window. And through the co-guarantee provision, Obsidian Meridian Holdings. The room went very quiet. Cass looked at him steadily. I want to be precise about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying, she said. Access to those documents through the co-guarantee provision is legitimate. The provision exists. The access right exists. What those documents are then used for, that's a separate question. She didn't leak it to a financial news desk, Taejin said. His voice was flat. I'm not suggesting she did, Cass said. I'm saying the information came from somewhere with that level of access, and I'd want to map every entity that had it before drawing conclusions. Map it, he said. Cass nodded. And the dinner, Raymond said quietly. 4 days. Taejin looked at him. You can cancel, Raymond said. Given the circumstances, the audit, the financing review, the article, canceling is defensible. You can frame it as a voluntary postponement pending completion of an internal governance process. The investors will read between the lines, but they'll read a controlled situation, not a collapse. Canceling tells everyone that I'm managing a crisis, Taejin said. You are managing a crisis, Raymond said without unkindness. The dinner stays. Taejin said it with the same finality he applied to every decision he'd stopped being willing to revisit. I need to see who shows up. The third day was the day Taejin drove to the estate. He told himself it was to retrieve documents from his home office. There were files there, physical files, the ones he'd kept in the locked cabinet behind the secondary bookshelf, that existed outside the digital ecosystem and that Raymond needed for the governance response. That was the reason he told himself he was going. He pulled up to the gate and entered his own code. The gate did not open. He entered it again. The panel blinked red. He sat in the car for a moment and looked at the gate, and then he called the property security line, and a voice he did not recognize picked up. This is Kwon Tae-jin, he said. I need the gate opened. 1 moment, sir. A pause that was slightly too long. I'm showing that the primary access credentials for this address were updated yesterday morning. Your code has been removed from the active list. I'd need authorization from the trust manager to restore access. Taejin looked at the gate. The trust manager, he repeated. Yes, sir. Holloway Meridian Trust has property management authority. I'd need written authorization from... He ended the call. He sat in the car outside the gate of the home he had lived in for 8 years, and he breathed through the tightening in his chest, and he looked at the property through the wrought iron, the Douglas fir, the driveway, the edge of the roofline visible above the tree line, and he felt something he had very little experience feeling, locked out. Not metaphorically, not institutionally, physically locked out of a place he had walked through every day for 8 years and had never once thought to read the document that said who owned it. He backed the car out of the driveway and drove back to the city. That evening, Cass Dunmore sent a message through Raymond with 3 pieces of information. The first, Philip Wren had been retained by Cascadia Ridge Development Group, the Portland consortium with competing interest in the waterfront parcels. The engagement had started 22 months ago, 4 months before Seora was hired as Taejin's PR consultant. Taejin read that and sat with it. Seora had been recruited, not for her PR expertise, not for what she eventually became to him personally. She had been positioned, with the deliberate patience of a competitive intelligence operation, to get inside his organization and extract information about Black Harbor's structural vulnerabilities. He thought about the emails, the dinners, the incremental erosion of the professional boundary between them that had felt, at the time, like chemistry and inevitability, and the natural consequence of spending too much time with someone who understood the pressures of his specific world. She had not been positioned there by Nia. That was not what this was. But she had been placed there by people who had the same interest in watching him fail, and she had served that interest, knowingly or not, with enough precision to matter. The second piece of information, James Whitfield of Pacific Business Review had spoken to 2 board members of KTJ Holdings in the last 72 hours. Neither board member had commented on the record, but both had confirmed to their own legal teams that the outreach had happened. His board members were being contacted. Before the dinner. The third piece, The article's publication was not scheduled for 4 days. It was scheduled for 2. Someone had moved the timeline. Tae-jin put the message down. He sat in the hotel suite he'd moved into 2 days ago, a corporate rate property that was clean and anonymous and entirely without the weight of anything he recognized. And he looked at the wall and he felt the full accumulated pressure of the last 72 hours settle onto him at once. Not gradually. All at once, the way a structure settles when the last load-bearing element finally yields. 2 days. The article in 2 days. The dinner in 4. If the article ran first, the dinner would be a different event entirely. Every person in that room would have read it. Every question would carry a second layer. Every handshake would be a calculation. He needed to get ahead of it. He called Raymond at 9:15 and told him to set up a call with Malcolm Vance for the following morning. "You want to negotiate," Raymond said. "I want to talk," Tae-jin said carefully. "Those aren't always different things." "I know." He hung up and sat in the quiet of the hotel room and thought about what he was actually prepared to offer. He was a man who had spent his life understanding leverage, how to acquire it, how to hold it, how to apply it at the moment of maximum effect. He understood the instruments of pressure and the language of settlement and the specific arithmetic of knowing when it costs less to give something up than to hold it. What he did not know, what he was sitting in that quiet room trying to calculate, was what Nia's actual objective was. Because it wasn't the money. He understood that now with the clarity that comes too late to most men. She had more of his money than he had realized, and she had built that position over years with enough legal structure to make it unassailable. She did not need to take from him. She already held. It wasn't public humiliation. If that was what she wanted, the article was already in motion, and the dinner could be turned into something devastating, and she would not have to lift a finger for any of it. What it was, what it might be, he could not quite bring himself to name directly, so he sat with it sideways. He thought about the night she had walked in and found the robe. He thought about the 8 years before that night. He thought about the times he had spoken to her with the tone he reserved for subordinates. Not cruelly, not with malice, but with the casual authority of a man who had forgotten, somewhere in the 4th or 5th year, that the person across the table from him was not a subordinate. He thought about the night, 6 years ago, when the legitimate empire had been on the edge of collapse. He had been in this very kind of hotel room, a different city, the same anonymous quiet, sitting with documents that told him his exposure exceeded his capacity to cover it. He had not told Nia how bad it was. He had told himself it was protection. He had told himself she did not need to carry that. 3 weeks later, anonymous financing had appeared through a mechanism he had never traced. He had assumed, at the time, that it was a competitor making a strategic investment for reasons of their own. He had been grateful without being curious, which was, he now understood, a particular kind of arrogance. The arrogance of believing that rescue came from the world out there and not from the person sitting across the breakfast table every morning. He reached for his phone. He started to call Nia's number. He stopped. He put the phone down. Because whatever he was about to say, he was not yet honest enough to say it well. And she would hear the gap between what he meant and what he was able to articulate, and she would measure that gap with the same precision she applied to everything, and he would lose not just the call but the ground. He had not yet figured out how to recover. He needed to walk into the meeting with Malcolm knowing what he was actually asking for. He needed, for the first time in longer than he could comfortably account for, to be honest with himself before he tried to be honest with anyone else. He lay back on the hotel bed in the dark and looked at the ceiling. The article was running in 2 days. 37 people were coming to a dinner that was now carrying the weight of everything that was collapsing around it. And somewhere in the structure of what he had built, the criminal organization, the legitimate empire, the marriage, the version of himself he had spent 15 years constructing and maintaining. There was a question he had never let himself sit with long enough to answer. Not what did Nia want? What had he wanted? When he had looked across a conference room in Seoul 11 years ago at a woman who was asking better questions than anyone else in the room and had felt the specific pull of recognition, not attraction, or not only that, but the recognition of a mind operating at a frequency he had rarely encountered, what had he wanted then? And at what point exactly had he stopped wanting that and started wanting something smaller and easier and more controllable that he had confused, in the convenience of the confusion, with success? He did not answer the question, but he let it stay. That was the most honest thing Kwon Tae-jin had done in years. He let the question stay in the room with him instead of moving to manage it. Outside the hotel window, Seattle moved through its nighttime rhythms, indifferent to the specific weight of one man's reckoning. In 2 days, a story would run that would change every room he walked into. In 4 days, 37 people would sit down to a dinner that was no longer the event he had planned. And in a penthouse across the city, Nia Holloway was sitting with Malcolm Vance in a leather portfolio. Not because she was angry, she had moved past anger before the car reached the highway on the night she left, but because she had understood something that Tae-jin was only now beginning to reach the edge of. That some situations do not have negotiated exits. That some damage, once it reaches a certain threshold, does not respond to the instruments of management and control. That the only way through is not around, not over, not with the application of more force in the same direction, but with the complete and total willingness to let the thing fall so that what replaces it is built on something real. The governance trigger was still inactive. Nia had not yet pulled it. She was waiting, not out of hesitation, not out of sentiment, but with the particular patience of someone who understood that the most important moments in any confrontation are not the ones where you act, but the ones where you make the other person understand, fully and without any remaining ambiguity, that you are entirely capable of doing so. The morning call with Malcolm was in 11 hours. Tae-jin closed his eyes. He did not sleep, but he let the dark sit on him, and that was the closest thing to surrender that a man like him knew how to manage. The call with Malcolm Vance was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Tae-jin was dressed and at the conference table in his hotel suite by 8:15, which was not punctuality so much as the inability to be anywhere else. He had ordered coffee and not touched it. He had arranged the documents Raymond sent over into 3 piles and then rearranged them into 2 and then left them in a single stack because the organizing was not actually helping him think. It was just giving his hands something to do while his mind ran the same circuit it had been running since morning. Raymond arrived at 8:40 with a legal pad and the specific expression of a man who had spent his career in rooms like this one and had developed the particular professional skill of keeping his own opinion entirely out of his face. "He'll call at 9, Raymond said. "His terms for the call are no recording, no secondary parties present on either end." "Fine." He also said Nia will not be on the call. Tae-jin looked up. "She's made her position clear through the governance filing," Raymond said carefully. "This call is Malcolm operating in his capacity as trust counsel. She's not participating in it directly." Tae-jin absorbed that. It told him something. Not what he wanted it to tell him, but something. The fact that she was not on the call meant she was not ready to speak to him directly. Or she had decided that direct conversation was no longer the instrument she intended to use. He wasn't sure which of those possibilities was worse. The phone rang at 9:02. Malcolm Vance had a voice that suited his 61 years, measured, slightly graveled, the voice of a man who had sat across many tables in many difficult conversations, and had learned that the person who speaks slower almost always ends up controlling more of the room. He did not open with pleasantries. "I'm going to tell you where things stand," Malcolm said, "and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond. That's how I'd like to conduct this." "Go ahead," Tae-jin said. "The governance trigger under the Obsidian Meridian Co-Guarantee is being activated this morning. That's not a negotiating position. That's notification. The review committee will be seated by end of week. All major expenditures above the threshold are frozen pending committee approval, including the investor dinner." Tae-jin's jaw tightened. "The dinner is in 2 days." "I'm aware. 400 people know about it." 37 people know about it, Malcolm said. "And I'd suggest that the nature of what those 37 people are going to read tomorrow morning makes the dinner a secondary concern." The article. "The story running tomorrow," Tae-jin said. "How much does she know about it?" A pause. "Not long, but present." "The governance filing required us to review the Black Harbor financial documentation under the co-guarantee access provision. What we found in those documents is a matter of legal record. What a financial publication discovered independently is not something I can speak to." It was a precise answer, technically accurate and completely non-committal about what had actually happened. "She didn't leak it," Tae-jin said. He said it not as an accusation, but as a statement he needed to test against Malcolm's response. "My client does not engage in that kind of conduct," Malcolm said. The steadiness in his voice carried the particular weight of a man who had watched Nia operate at close range for a long time and was entirely confident in that assessment. "Then what does your client want?" Taijin said. Malcolm let the question sit for a moment. "My client wants the marriage dissolved. She wants the financial irregularities in the Black Harbor development fully acknowledged and repaid through the corporate entity from which they were drawn. She wants the governance structure of KTJ Holdings restructured to include independent oversight, and she wants the process completed without public litigation." "Without public litigation," Taijin repeated. "Nia is not interested in destroying what can be preserved," Malcolm said. "The legitimate companies employ real people. The development projects, properly restructured, have real value. She is not interested in burning the house down." Taijin looked at the window. The city was fully lit now, the morning hard and clear the way Seattle mornings sometimes were between the gray stretches. Everything in sharp relief, the water bright in the distance. "And if I don't agree to those terms," he said, "then the separation proceeds through full discovery." Malcolm's voice did not change temperature. "Every document, every account, every communication becomes part of the evidentiary record, and the governance trigger remains active indefinitely." Taijin understood the arithmetic. Full discovery meant the $3.7 million in corporate funds used to finance his relationship with Seora became a public record. It meant the Black Harbor environmental assessments, the leveraging ratios, the contractual gaps. All of it entered a legal process that would not be over in weeks or months. It meant the investor dinner became the opener to a years-long story that financial publications and corporate intelligence services would pick through with professional thoroughness. "Give me until the dinner," he said. "The dinner is not happening," Malcolm said. Not unkindly, just factually. "The trigger activates this morning. The dinner exceeds the expenditure threshold." Taijin stood up from the chair. He walked to the window. He pressed one hand flat against the glass and felt the cold of it against his palm. 24 hours, he said. Taijin. Malcolm's voice shifted. Not warmer, but more direct. "I've known your wife for a long time. I have watched her manage an enormous amount with an extraordinary amount of grace. What I'm offering you right now, on her behalf, is the least damaging version of a situation that you created. I would encourage you not to negotiate for time you're going to use to look for exits that don't exist." The line went quiet. Taijin took the phone from his ear and looked at it. Then he put it back. "Tell her I'll be at the dinner location at 7 tonight," he said. "If she wants to talk, I'll be there." "She's not going to tell her anyway," Taijin said. He ended the call. Raymond looked at him from the conference table with the expression of a man who had heard one side of a conversation and was assembling the picture. "Cancel the dinner," Taijin said. "Notify all 37. Frame it as a voluntary postponement for internal governance review. Professional, no details." Raymond nodded. He had his phone out before Taijin finished the sentence. "And get Daniel Park on the phone. I need him to pull the full Black Harbor expenditure record, not the summary. The actual line item ledger. Everything." "You're going to review the full record," Raymond said. It was not quite a question. "I need to know the exact number before anyone else puts it in front of me," Taijin said. "I will not sit across a table from a settlement document and be surprised by a figure." The article ran at 6 in the morning the following day. Pacific Business Review, 14 paragraphs. A headline that managed to be both precise and devastating in the particular way that good financial journalism achieves when the underlying material is genuinely damaging. The headline read, "Black Harbor Development Faces Governance Review Amid Financing Concerns. KTJ Holdings Under Independent Audit." It did not mention Nia by name. It did not mention the marriage. It was scrupulously financial in its framing, the leveraging ratios, the co-guarantee structure, the environmental liability methodology. It cited 3 unnamed sources with direct knowledge of the governance proceedings. It included a comment from a Pacific Northwest development analyst who described the Black Harbor financing as aggressively structured for a project at this stage of environmental clearance. By 7:30 in the morning, Taijin had received 9 messages from board members, 6 from investors, 2 from the contractors who had flown in for the now-canceled dinner, and 1 from a journalist at a Seattle business publication asking if he'd like to provide comment for a follow-up piece. He read all of them and responded to none of them. He was already in the car. The Pacific Business Review article had done exactly what a well-timed piece of financial journalism does to a room full of people with capital at stake. It had changed the quality of the air. Taejin could feel it in every call he didn't take, in the shift in response time from people who had previously answered within the hour, in the specific silence from the two men on his board who had previously been his most reliable supporters. Fear moved through institutional relationships like weather. You didn't always see it directly, but you felt the pressure change and you knew what was coming. He spent the morning at KTJ Holdings headquarters, in his own office, on his own turf. That mattered. A man who retreated from his own building sent a message that Raymond would spend weeks trying to counteract. He sat at his desk and he held meetings and he managed the information environment with the cold efficiency of someone who had been managing information environments under pressure for a very long time. But underneath the efficiency, something was shifting. Daniel Park came in at 10:30 with the full expenditure ledger. He placed it on the desk and stepped back, and Taejin looked at the thing. A bound document, printed, 112 pages of line-item financial records. And he picked it up and he read it. Not the summary. The actual record, page by page. He had expected it to be bad. Raymond had prepared him for bad. But there's a difference between being prepared for something and sitting with the physical document in your hands and moving through it line by line and watching a number accumulate across 18 months of entries that had individually seemed defensible and collectively made a picture that was not. Private aviation, client entertainment, accommodation, jewelry, listed under gifts to corporate partners. A villa rental in October described as an executive retreat. Hotel suites in 4 different cities over 11 months categorized under executive travel. The final figure on the summary page was $3.7 million. He closed the document. He put it on the desk. He sat with his hands flat on the surface, and he breathed through the specific discomfort of sitting inside the full reality of something you have been, on some level, aware of for a long time without allowing yourself to look at it directly. He had known, not in those precise numbers, but he had known that the line between personal expense and corporate expense had been maintained with less rigor than he applied to every other financial boundary in his operation. He had allowed it because he had told himself it was manageable. He had allowed it because the legitimate empire was growing and the Black Harbor project was moving, and there was always enough momentum in the forward direction to make the thing you were avoiding feel like a detail. Nia had managed the trust that held 38% of this company for 6 years. She had watched those line items. She had said nothing. He did not know whether that silence had been patience or strategy or both, but he understood now that it had been intentional, that she had made a choice, every quarter, to let the record accumulate without confronting it, and that the record was now sitting on his desk like a verdict. He picked up his phone. He called a number he had not called in 3 years. His mother answered on the second ring, which meant she had been near the phone, which meant someone had already told her something. His mother was a 70-year-old woman who had built a catering business from nothing in a country where she spoke the language imperfectly, and she had the particular intelligence of people who have survived by reading the room before anyone told them what the room contained. She said his name. Just his name. The way she had said it when he was 17 and had come home with the specific expression of someone who had done something they could not undo. "I know," he said, in Korean. "I know." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That woman you married, she's a good woman." He didn't answer. "You treated her like furniture," his mother said. "Nice furniture, but furniture." He closed his eyes. "What are you going to do?" his mother said. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "That's the first true thing you've said to me in a while," she said. And then, before he could respond, "Don't lose her because your pride costs more than she does." She hung up. He sat with the deadline for a moment. Then he put the phone down and looked at the ledger on his desk and thought about a woman who had quietly held 38% of his empire for 6 years and had never once used it as leverage until the night he gave her a reason to. At 4 in the afternoon, Taejin's security chief, a broad-shouldered man named Jin Ho, who had been with him for 11 years and communicated almost exclusively in complete sentences of 5 words or fewer, appeared in the office doorway. "Someone at the building," Jin Ho said. "Who?" "Woman, young, media credentials. She's been in the lobby for 40 minutes. Send her out." "Already did." Jin Ho did not move from the doorway. There's another one at the side entrance, and a car outside that's been on the block twice. Tae-jin looked up. The article moved faster than I expected, he said. Faster, Jin-ho agreed. Add 2 to the overnight rotation at the hotel, and I need a car at the underground exit at 6:30. Jin-ho nodded and left. Tae-jin looked at his phone. Nia had not responded to the message he had left through Malcolm. The message saying he would be at the dinner venue at 7 if she wanted to talk. He had not expected her to confirm, but the silence was its own kind of information, and what it told him was that she had not said no. He spent the next 2 hours in a conversation with Raymond and 2 external corporate counsel that Raymond had brought in, specialists in governance restructuring who had navigated similar situations for other clients, and who spoke with the brisk, slightly bloodless efficiency of people who dealt with institutional crises the way surgeons dealt with injuries, clinically and without letting the patient's distress change the procedure. They outlined a response strategy. Public statement acknowledging the governance review as voluntary and proactive. A board communication reinforcing the long-term strength of the underlying assets. At the independent committee seated by end of week, not under Malcolm's governance trigger, but voluntarily, framing the move as initiative rather than compulsion. The framing matters enormously, the senior counsel said. She was a woman in her 50s with the quality of absolute composure that comes from having seen enough catastrophes to stop being personally disturbed by them. The difference between we are under audit and we are conducting an internal governance review is the difference between a crisis story and a management story. What about the expenditure figures? Tae-jin said. She looked at him. Which expenditures? The ones in the ledger. He watched her face. The line items. She looked at Raymond. Raymond cleared his throat. We haven't had that specific conversation yet with external counsel. Have it now, Tae-jin said. He put the ledger on the table. He let them read the summary page. He watched the senior counsel's face go through a brief professional recalibration. That changes the public statement, she said. Her voice did not change, but the tempo did, just slightly, just enough to register. We can't frame this as purely procedural. If the expenditure record is going to surface in discovery, it will surface. These things always surface. What do we do? Raymond asked. We get ahead of it, she said. Voluntary disclosure as part of the governance review. Frame it as identified irregularities that management is correcting proactively. It's painful. It's significantly better than having it found. Tae-jin looked at the ledger. That's an admission. It's a controlled admission, she said, as opposed to an uncontrolled one. She held his gaze. Mr. Kwan, I've been doing this for 23 years. Uncontrolled admissions, in my experience, cost 4 times as much and take 3 times as long. Whatever you're protecting by delaying this conversation, it's not worth the arithmetic. He looked at the window. Set it up, he said. What? At 6:40, he took the underground exit to the car Jin-ho had arranged and rode across the city to the restaurant. It was a private dining space on the 43rd floor of a tower above the waterfront, the same venue he had booked for the investor dinner 6 weeks ago. His booking was still active. The dinner had been canceled, but the room had not been released. He had told Raymond to leave it. He did not know if Nia would come. He rode the elevator up alone and walked into the private dining room and stood for a moment in the space that had been arranged for 37 people and was now empty of everyone except 2 members of his security detail who positioned themselves at opposite walls and went invisible the way good security does. The table was still set. White linen, crystal, the centerpiece arrangements that the venue had prepared and not been told to remove. 37 place settings around a table meant for a different version of tonight. He sat in his chair, the one at the head. He looked at the chair to his right. He had specified the seating arrangement 6 weeks ago. The chair to his right had been Nia's. It was still set for her. He poured water from the carafe on the table and drank it and waited. At 7:14, the elevator opened. Nia walked in wearing a black dress beneath a cream coat, and she was not alone. Malcolm Vance walked 2 steps behind her with a leather portfolio under one arm. And behind Malcolm was a woman Tae-jin did not recognize, 40-ish, professional, with the discreet efficiency of someone whose role was documentation. Nia did not look at the empty place settings. She looked at Tae-jin. He stood. She crossed the room and took the chair to his right. Not because he indicated it, not with any ceremony, just the simple direct movement of a woman who knew where she was going and went there. Malcolm sat across the table. The documentation woman sat beside Malcolm and opened a notebook. Tae-jin looked at the notebook. I asked for a private conversation. Malcolm is my counsel, Naya said. Everything said in this room is part of a documented proceeding. Her voice was the same as it had been on the phone 3 days ago. Completely level, giving him nothing to grab onto. If you wanted private, you had 8 years of private. That window is closed. He looked at her. This close, he could see the things that the phone call had not given him. The set of her jaw, the slight tension around her eyes that was not grief but something adjacent to it, the way she sat with her back not quite touching the chair, the posture of someone who was holding a position with the entire length of their spine. She was tired. He could see that. Not weak. There was nothing weak about the way she was sitting in that chair, but tired in the way that people get tired when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time and are finally setting it down, which is its own kind of exhaustion. He sat back down. The governance trigger, he said, it activated this morning. Yes. The dinner's canceled. Yes. He looked at his hands on the table. The article. I saw it. Did you? He stopped, looked at her. Did you talk to them? She held his gaze. No. He believed her. That was the thing. He believed her without needing a longer answer, because the no she gave him had the particular texture of a statement that did not require elaboration, the texture of a true thing. Someone at the company talked, he said. That's a matter for your internal investigation, she said. Malcolm placed the leather portfolio on the table and opened it. We'd like to go through the settlement terms as I outlined them to Raymond. If you have responses, we'll hear them. Tae-jin looked at the portfolio, looked at Malcolm, then he looked at Nia. Before we go through the document, he said, I want to say something. Nia's expression did not change. She gave him the smallest indication, not a nod, just the absence of an interruption, that he could continue. 6 years ago, he said, when the expansion collapsed, the anonymous investor group. He watched her face. I never figured out where the money came from. She looked at him. I should have, he said. I told myself it wasn't important to trace. The truth is, I didn't look because I didn't want to know that I'd needed help. He looked at the table for a moment and then back at her. That was mine to own, that I couldn't look at. The room was quiet. And you covered for me without telling me, he said, without making me sit with what it meant that you had to do that. You wouldn't have accepted it if I'd told you, she said, simply, without accusation. No, he agreed, I wouldn't have. Malcolm shifted in his seat slightly. Tae-jin ignored him. I'm not saying this as a negotiating position, Tae-jin said. I want to be clear about that. I know how this sounds. I know the timing makes it look like... He stopped, breathed. I'm saying it because it's true, and I have not said enough true things to you in a long time. Nia looked at him for a long moment, and then something moved across her face. Not forgiveness, nothing as simple or as generous as that. Something more complicated. The expression of a person watching a man they once loved arrive, years too late, at a room they had long since furnished and learned to live without him in. I know it's true, she said quietly. That's not the problem. Then what is? The problem, she said, is that you're capable of this right now, in this room, with this much at stake. And you were not capable of it when I was sitting across from you at our own dinner table with nothing at stake at all. Her voice was still level, but something had entered it. Not heat, but weight. I would have given anything for this version of you 5 years ago, Tae-jin. I would have built a whole different life with this version of you. The past tense landed the way past tense does when it's been earned. But that's not what happened, she said. And I am not going to spend the rest of my life waiting for you to become what you're being right now in a hotel dining room because your empire is at stake. He did not have an answer to that. Not because he couldn't find one, but because she was right, and he was, in this moment, finally equipped to recognize when he was wrong and to let it be wrong without covering it with something. Malcolm cleared his throat gently. The settlement document, he said. He slid it across the table. Tae-jin looked at it. Repayment of the $3.7 million from the corporate expenditure irregularities. Surrender of voting proxies to an independent trust for 3 years. Permanent governance restrictions on unilateral financial authority. Dissolution of the marriage without public litigation. He read every clause. He did not look for the exits this time. He read it the way you read something when you have finally arrived at the point where reading carefully is the only form of respect you have left to offer. The centerpiece arrangements were beginning to wilt slightly at the edges. They had been set for an event that was never going to happen, in a room that had been configured for a version of this night that belonged to a different man's plans. He turned to the last page, the signature line. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Nia. Nia, the estate, he said. The initiative you're building. She met his eyes. The women you're going to bring there, he said. Is that something you planned before? She considered the question, not performing consideration, actually considering it. I knew the estate wasn't going to stay what it was, she said. What it became, that came later. A pause. When I was sitting in the penthouse the first night, I thought about my mother, about what she built with what she had. She looked at her hands briefly and then back at him. I thought about what I wanted to build with what I had. She would have approved, he said. Nia's expression shifted, just briefly, just enough. Yes, she would have. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the silence of two people sitting inside the ruins of something that had once been real and finding, in the specific wreckage of it, the occasional piece that still had its original shape. Then Malcolm said, "We need a decision tonight." Taejin looked at the settlement document. He looked at the signature line. He picked up the pen that Malcolm had placed beside the document. He looked at Nia one more time. "Is this what you wanted?" he said. "When you walked out with the suitcase, is this what you were going toward?" For the first time since she had entered the room, something moved through Nia's composure, not breaking it, but surfacing briefly behind it, the way something moves under still water. "What I wanted," she said, and her voice had changed, still level, but something in it now that had not been there before. Something human and unhidden and exhausted in the truest sense of that word, was a husband who never made this meeting necessary. The room held that. Nobody moved. Taejin looked at the pen in his hand. He looked at the settlement document. He looked at the signature line with his name waiting beneath it, at the bottom of a document that represented the full accumulated weight of every choice he had made and everything he had failed to see and every version of himself he had chosen when he should have chosen differently. The Mafia boss, who had spent his entire adult life making other people capitulate, looked at the line that asked for his name, and he put the pen to the paper. The pen came off the paper. Taejin set it down on the table without looking at where it landed. He looked at his own signature, at the specific way his name sat in the space provided for it, at the finality of ink on paper, in the particular context of a document that had been constructed with the explicit purpose of closing something that could not be reopened. Malcolm picked up the settlement. He reviewed the signature with the professional thoroughness of a man who had learned, over 30 years of practice, that the devil in legal documents lives in the details of execution and not in the broad architecture. He turned to the last page. He looked at the signature. He looked at the date. Then he placed the document face down on the table and looked at Taejin. "There are administrative steps that follow from this," Malcolm said. "Raymond will receive a detailed timeline by morning. The 30-day repayment clock starts today." "I know," Taejin said. "The committee seating happens Thursday, regardless of any other proceedings. Your governance council should be prepared for a comprehensive review of the Black Harbor documentation in the first session." "I know," Taejin said again. His voice was the same each time, not defeated, not hostile. Just the voice of a man who had run out of the particular energy required to perform anything and was speaking from whatever was underneath the performance. Malcolm closed the portfolio. The documentation woman had already closed her notebook. The two of them stood and the room shifted with their standing. The specific shift that happens in rooms when the formal portion of something has concluded and the informal portion, which sometimes carries more weight, is about to begin or is being deliberately avoided. Nia stood. She put her coat on. She did it with the same unhurried precision she had brought to everything in that room. Each button, the collar adjusted with 2 fingers, the belt left loose in the way she had always worn coats that had belts. Taejin had seen her put on a coat 10,000 times in 8 years, and he had never once watched it the way he watched it now, which was with the full attention of a man who understood that he was watching something for the last time and had arrived at that understanding too late to change what had made it the last time. Malcolm, she said, give us a moment. Malcolm looked at her briefly. Then he looked at Tae Jin. Then he picked up the portfolio and nodded at the documentation woman, and they walked to the elevator. The doors opened. The doors closed. The room was very quiet. Nia remained standing. She did not sit back down. She looked at Tae Jin across the length of table and the wilting centerpieces and the 35 untouched place settings of an event that had existed only as a plan. Tae Jin looked back at her. There was a specific quality to the silence between them. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say, but the silence of two people for whom the things that remain to be said exist in a register that the ordinary instruments of conversation are not adequately built to carry. The night the expansion collapsed, Nia said, 6 years ago. He did not move. You came home at 2 in the morning and you sat in the kitchen and you didn't say anything for 40 minutes. Her voice was level, not cold. Just the voice of a woman reporting on something she has revisited many times and has finally decided to say out loud. I made tea and I sat with you. You didn't tell me how bad it was. I already knew. I had seen the exposure figures through the trust accounts. I knew exactly how close the edge was. Tae Jin's jaw tightened slightly. He said nothing. And I remember thinking, she continued, that if I told you I knew, if I told you I could see this full picture, you would leave the kitchen. You would find a way to be somewhere that my knowledge of your situation couldn't reach you. She looked at him steadily. So I didn't tell you, I just sat there, and 3 weeks later I moved the money. He looked at the table. I'm not telling you this to reopen something, she said. I'm telling you because I have been honest about what you did wrong in this marriage, and I need to be honest about what I did wrong too. She paused. I made myself smaller than I was because I thought it was the only way to stay beside you. And that was not your fault entirely. Some of that was mine. He looked up. I should have made you see me, she said, earlier, clearly, without the protection of the structure and the distance. Something moved in her face, not grief, not quite, but the thing that is adjacent to grief when the loss has been processed enough to be looked at directly. I thought being indispensable was the same as being valued. It is not the same thing. The room held that. Tae Jin picked up the pen he had used to sign the settlement. He turned it in his hand once and then set it back down. It was not a purposeful gesture. It was the gesture of a man whose hands needed something to do while his interior processed what was being handed to him. I knew you were exceptional when I married you, he said. His voice had changed, lower, slower, without the executive timbre that he wore in every professional context, and that had, over years, begun bleeding into the domestic one. I told myself that was enough, that recognizing it was the same as honoring it. He looked at the pen. It is not the same thing. She held his gaze. No, she said. It is not. He looked at her. The specific look of a man arriving, too late, at the room he should have been building toward for years. There was no bargaining in it, no request. Just the raw and unmanaged quality of a face that had given up the apparatus of control and was letting what was underneath it be visible. I'm going to be different, he said. Not to her, or not only to her. More the air of the room, the way people say true things when they are saying them to themselves in the presence of a witness. Not for you. I'm not saying this to you as a proposal. I'm saying it because it's the only version of what comes next that I can live with. Nia looked at him for a long time. I believe you, she said finally. Those 3 words cost her something. He could see that. She was not offering them as a gift or as an opening. She was offering them as the accurate statement of her genuine assessment, which was the most honest thing she could have said, and also the most painful, because it acknowledged the existence of the man he was capable of being in the same breath as the finality of what had been decided. She moved towards the elevator. She stopped at the edge of the table. She looked back at him once. Eat something, she said. You look like you haven't been eating. Then she walked to the elevator and the doors opened, and she was gone. Tae Jin sat alone in the room for a long time after that. The security detail at the walls had been trained not to exist unless they were needed, and they did not exist now. He sat at the head of the table with the signed settlement document gone and the wilting centerpieces and the empty chair to his right that had been Nia's and had never stopped being Nia's, and the full accumulated weight of everything that had happened in the last 14 days sitting on the table in front of him like something physical. He reached out and picked up one of the crystal water glasses from the untouched place setting beside his. He turned it in his hands. He put it back down. He stood up. He put on his coat. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button, and when the doors opened, he stepped inside and rode down 43 floors to the street. And the street received him the way streets receive everyone, without distinction and without ceremony, just the cold February air and the indifferent movement of a city going about its night. He walked, not to anywhere specific, not with direction. He walked with his hands in his coat pockets and his collar up, and the cold specific against his face, and he walked through several blocks of downtown Seattle, watching the ordinary theater of a city at 9 o'clock in the evening. Restaurants lit and occupied, a couple arguing quietly outside a parking structure, a man in a hotel uniform smoking in the alley between two buildings with the focused satisfaction of someone taking 12 minutes away from the requirements of their life. He walked until he had walked the sharpest edge off the thing he was carrying. Then he stopped. He stood on a corner and he took his phone out and he called his mother. She answered on the second ring. "Are you eating?" she said. No greeting. He almost laughed. He did not quite manage it, but the almost was real, and the realness of it surprised him. "Not enough," he said. "Come on Sunday," she said. "I'll make jjigae." "Okay," he said. "And sleep," she said. "You sound like a man who hasn't slept." "I signed the papers tonight." A beat. She was quiet for a moment in the particular way his mother was quiet when she was absorbing something she had anticipated but still needed a moment to fully receive. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Just okay." With the specific weight of a woman who had lived long enough to understand that some endings are not failures, but the corrections that come after failures, and that the correction, however painful, is the thing that allows what comes next to be built on something real. "Come Sunday," she said again. He said he would. He meant it. He hung up and stood on the corner for another minute with the cold air moving around him and the city entirely unconcerned with the particular shape of his life. Then he started walking again. The repayment arrived in full on the 28th day. Raymond called at 11 in the morning to confirm the wire transfer had cleared and had been received by the trust. Tae-jin was in his new office, smaller, on a lower floor than he had occupied before, in a building that had no association with the previous institutional identity of his name. He was sitting at his desk with the Black Harbor revised development documents open in front of him, working through the restructuring plan that the independent committee had approved 2 weeks earlier. The revised project was smaller than what he had imagined. The casino component had been removed. The environmental review had identified too many liability variables in the footprint it would require, and the committee had made the call that the liability exposure was not justified. The hotel component survived, scaled back. The marina stayed. The entertainment complex was reduced to a waterfront event space that was more realistic and less spectacular than the original vision. It was still a real project. It was still worth building. But it was not the monument he had planned. It was not the thing that was going to announce to everyone who mattered in the Pacific Northwest business world that Kwon Tae-jin had arrived at a level from which he could not be moved. It was a good development project, properly leveraged, with appropriate oversight and a governance structure that would survive scrutiny. He had spent 3 weeks learning to distinguish between those two categories, the monument and the actual good thing, and to let the loss of the former not infect his relationship with the latter. He was still working on it. "The transfer is confirmed," Raymond said through the phone. Malcolm's office acknowledged receipt. "The trust has issued a formal release of the co-guarantee pending completion of the governance restructuring." "Okay," Tae-jin said. "You completed that in 28 days, Raymond said. There was something in his voice, not quite admiration, but the particular quality of acknowledgement that comes from a man who has watched other people fail to do significantly easier things with significantly more resources. "I want to note that, for the record." "Noted," Tae-jin said. He hung up and sat for a moment looking at the Black Harbor documents. He turned to the environmental section. The revised assessment, conducted by a firm the committee had selected independently, which had produced a document that was considerably less optimistic than the original and considerably more useful. It told the truth about the site. The truth about the site was manageable, but it required work and it required time, and it could not be accelerated through the application of confidence and expansion momentum, which was how Tae-jin had previously approached most things that required work and time. He turned to the next page of the assessment and read. Jinho knocked on the door at noon. He came in carrying 2 containers of food from a Korean restaurant 3 blocks away. He set one on the desk in front of Tae-jin and opened the other for himself and sat in the chair across from the desk and began eating without ceremony. Tae-jin looked at the container. Your mother called, Jinho said. He did not look up from his food. She called you. She said you weren't eating. Tae-jin opened the container. It was a proper meal. Rice, kimchi, braised short rib that had been cooked for a long time in the way his mother made it, which meant the restaurant had a chef who actually knew what they were doing. He picked up the chopsticks. When did she get your number? He said. Years ago, Jinho said. He continued eating. Tae-jin looked at the side of Jinho's face, at the jaw, the scar below the left ear from a situation 11 years ago that neither of them had ever found it necessary to discuss in detail, the complete absence of self-consciousness with which this man occupied every space he was in. I'm done with the other work, Tae-jin said. Jinho looked up. The organization. He held Jinho's gaze. I've been telling you it's winding down. It's done now, completely. He set the chopsticks down. If that changes what you want to do, I know what I want to do, Jinho said. Which is? Jinho looked at him for a moment. Whatever comes next, he said. He went back to eating. Tae-jin picked up his chopsticks. They ate in silence, which was how they had always operated most effectively. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the things that actually mattered between them had almost never required the infrastructure of conversation to be communicated. The board addressed Tae-jin directly in the 3rd week of the governance proceedings. It was Edmund Yi who raised it. The board chair waited until the formal agenda items had been completed and the external counsel had stepped out of the room, and then he looked at Tae-jin across the conference table with the particular patience of a 70-year-old man who had earned the right to say what he thought without softening it for the benefit of anyone's comfort. I've been on this board for 16 years, Edmund said. I've watched you build this company from a mid-level operation into something that employed 400 people at its peak. I've watched you make decisions that I disagreed with and that turned out to be right, and decisions I agreed with that turned out to be wrong. That's the business. He folded his hands on the table. What I have not watched before now is you sit in that chair and tell this board the full truth about something damaging without being forced to. Tae-jin met his eyes and did not look away. The governance restructuring is going to create friction, Edmund continued. Committee approvals are slower than unilateral authority. Independent oversight is sometimes wrong. You're going to sit in meetings and watch people with less experience than you make decisions that you could make better on your own, and you are going to have to live inside that structure. He paused. Can you do that? I don't know, Tae-jin said. Edmund looked at him. That's the honest answer, Tae-jin said. I don't know if I can do it well. I know I can try to do it. He held the older man's gaze. I think that's the best I can offer you right now. Edmund Yi looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in the old man's face. Not warmth exactly, but the particular quality of respect that one gives to honesty when honesty has cost the person offering it something visible. That's enough, Edmund said. He moved on to the next item. Seora called once, 3 weeks after the dinner room. Tae-jin saw her name and let it ring twice before he picked up. Not because he needed time to decide whether to answer, but because he needed 2 rings to collect the specific quality of presence the call was going to require. I'm leaving Seattle, she said. No greeting, same as the last time. I wanted you to know. Where? He said. Vancouver first. I have some contacts there. A pause. After that, I don't know. He was quiet for a moment. Outside his office window, the city was doing what it did in November, settling into its gray season, the sky and the water finding the same tone, the whole Pacific Northwest hunkering into the long interior stretch that lasted until March. You should have told me about Ren, he said. Not with anger, with the flat quality of a statement that had been examined from multiple angles and arrived at the same place each time. I know, she said. Earlier, not after. I know, she said again, and then, I was in over my head with what I'd already done. Telling you felt like the damage was already done, and telling you would have just made me the person who told you about damage I caused. A pause. That's not an excuse. No, he said. It's not. The line held a moment of the particular silence of people who have done things to each other that cannot be undone and are both aware of it and have made a separate peace with it individually. "I didn't know about the earrings," she said quietly. "I want to say that again. I genuinely didn't know." He believed her about that. He had believed her about that even in the room where it had happened, which had not made it less of what it was. The inadvertent desecration of something that should have been protected, which is its own category of damage, regardless of intent. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry," she said. "For all of it. I know that's not... I know it doesn't fix anything." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." Another silence. "Take care of yourself," she said. He said the same. He meant it, which was a more complicated thing to mean than it appeared on the surface, but he did mean it. He did not wish her continued consequences. He wished her the difficult, unglamorous work of building something real on the other side of the choices she had made. He hung up. He did not think about the call for very long after it ended. There was a quality to it that was finished, not forgiven, not forgotten, but closed in the way that things close when both parties have moved past the stage where the wound is the organizing principle of the relationship and into the stage where the relationship has effectively ceased, and what remains is just the clean, unadorned acknowledgement of two people who did damage to each other and have agreed, without a formal agreement, to stop. The Holloway House initiative opened on the third Saturday of October, and it opened without a ribbon or a photographer or a press statement. What it opened with was a kitchen full of food, 7 made beds, a library full of books that Darlene had curated with the focused conviction of someone who understood exactly what reading does for people in the process of reconstructing their sense of the possible, and a staff of 4 who had been recruited for their specific combination of practical expertise and the particular quality of presence that cannot be trained, the quality of being genuinely unbothered by difficulty, of being able to sit across from a person in the worst stretch of their life and communicate, without performing it, that the worst stretch is not the full picture. Nia hired the director first. Her name was Cecile Okafor, and she had spent 12 years running a residential program for women in Chicago that had a waiting list that never went below 40 people in a success rate, measured not in some soft metric, but in the specific hard ones: housing stability and employment and credit recovery, and the absence of return to the situations that had made the program necessary in the first place, that put every comparable program in the region to shame. Cecile was 44. She was compact and direct, and had the habit of looking at people with a quality of full attention that most people never quite got accustomed to, because it was the attention of someone who was actually listening and not preparing their response. She had interviewed Nia as much as Nia had interviewed her. "Tell me why you're doing this," Cecile had said, in the second hour of their first meeting. Nia had looked at her. "Because I know what it feels like to walk out of a situation carrying less than you deserve and walk into something that asks you to prove you're worth the help." Cecile had looked at her for a moment. "And the estate? Why here?" "Because I had it," Nia said simply, "and because turning it into something that served only me seemed like the wrong use of a building with this many rooms." "Most women in your position would sell it," Cecile said. "Most women in my position wouldn't have kept it in a trust for 11 years, Nia said. Cecile had almost smiled. "Fair," she said. She had accepted the position 2 weeks later. What? Amara arrived on the initiative's first day of operation. She was 24, though the particular quality of what she carried aged her perception by several years in either direction depending on the moment. She had come from a situation that had taken her 3 years to leave. Not 3 years of sustained attempt, but 3 years of circling the leaving, of approaching it and retreating, of leaving in small increments that collapsed back into the original shape, until the collapse was no longer survivable, and she had left with a backpack and a folder of documents that represented the full administrative residue of a life she was trying to separate from. She stood in the foyer of the Holloway House initiative and looked at the space around her with the specific expression of someone who has learned to not fully believe in good things until they've been in contact with them long enough to verify. Nia came out of the intake office. She looked at Amara. She looked at the backpack. She looked at the manila folder held in both hands. "I saw the information online," Amara said carefully. "I wasn't sure if I qualified. I don't have... I brought my documents. I didn't know what you'd need to see." "What's your name?" Nia said. "Amara." Nia held out her hand. They shook. The handshake was brief and real. "I'm Nia, come in." The intake process took 2 hours. Cecile sat in on the second half. The case manager, a methodical woman named Priya, who had a gift for making complex financial situations legible without condescension, made notes throughout. By the end of the 2 hours, they had a full picture of what Amara was carrying: the credit damage, the housing gap, the employment history that had been disrupted twice by the requirements of the situation she had been in, the specific legal questions about the lease she had co-signed and what her rights were in extracting her name from it. None of it was unusual. That was the thing Nia had understood before the initiative opened, and that the first weeks of operation confirmed daily. The specifics were always different, and the structure was always recognizable. The damage was always specific, and the pathway out was always the same basic sequence. Stability first, then the practical reconstruction of the material conditions that made independent life possible, then the longer and less linear work of reconstructing the internal conditions, the belief that the independent life was not just survivable, but worthwhile. The sequence was not fast. That was the other thing. There was no version of this that was fast. Amara stayed 4 months. Priya worked through her credit situation with the patience of someone who understood that financial recovery is not a single intervention, but a continuous series of small, unsexy decisions made in the right direction over a sustained period of time. By the end of the second month, 2 collections had been disputed successfully. By the end of the third, Amara had opened her first independent bank account. Her name only, no one else's on the account. Nothing that could be accessed or monitored or controlled by anyone but her. She attended every financial workshop. She sat in the front row for the legal rights sessions. She did her homework with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that understanding was the specific tool she needed and was going to acquire it with or without whatever natural aptitude for it she did or didn't have. In the evening, sometimes she came to Nia's office. Not with problems, just to sit. Nia allowed it. She understood the quality of what Amara was looking for in those evenings, which was not advice or intervention, but simply the presence of someone who was occupying a version of the future that felt, from where Amara was standing, more real when there was a person inside it. She was also in the way of young women who are smart and have been in situations that required them to be unobtrusive, watching. She was watching how Nia moved through the building, how she spoke to Cecile and to Priya and to the legal advocate, how she made decisions, not dramatically, not with the performative authority of someone who needed the room to register their authority, but with the quiet directness of a person who had been making consequential decisions for a long time and had no remaining anxiety about the act of deciding. One evening in February, Amara knocked on the office doorframe. Nia looked up. "Can I ask you something?" Amara said. "Yes." "When you left, your situation, were you scared?" Nia put down what she was reading. She looked at Amara in the doorway, at the backpack she no longer carried everywhere, at the way she was standing now, less compressed than the woman who had walked in 4 months ago, less arranged around the anticipation of something going wrong. "I was something I still don't have the right word for," Nia said. "Not scared exactly, more like, for the first time in a long time I could see clearly, and the clarity was uncomfortable because it didn't leave any room for the things I'd been telling myself." Amara looked at her. "What were you telling yourself?" Nia thought about it honestly. "That my patience was a form of strength," she said. "That staying was the harder and therefore more admirable choice." She paused. "What I eventually understood is that staying had stopped being a choice a long time before I left. It had become a habit. And habits and choices feel identical from the inside, which is how you can end up very far from where you intended to be without ever making a single deliberate decision to go there." Amara was quiet for a moment. "How did you know?" she said, "that it was time." "I came home and found what I found," Nia said. "And instead of feeling the things I expected to feel, hurt, angry, betrayed, I felt clear." She held Amara's gaze. "I understood that what I was feeling was the relief of finally having a reason that was legible enough to act on, that the leaving had been ready for a while, the reason just hadn't caught up." Amara leaned against the doorframe. She was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who is fitting new information against something they have been trying to articulate to themselves. "I think I knew for 2 years," Amara said quietly, "before I actually left." "Yes," Nia said, "most people do." "That's not—" Amara stopped. That doesn't make me stupid. No, Nia said firmly, without qualification. It makes you human. The distance between knowing and leaving is not a measure of intelligence. It is a measure of what you have to lose and what you have been told about yourself, and how long those two things have been operating at full volume. She looked at Amara. You left. That is the fact that matters. Amara nodded. She straightened up in the doorframe. I found an apartment, she said. Priya found it. It's small. It's in my budget. When do you see it? Thursday. Let me know how it goes, Nia said. Amara knocked twice on the doorframe, a light, almost playful gesture, the gesture of someone who has recovered enough access to levity to let it surface occasionally, and went back down the hall. Nia listened to her footsteps. She sat for a moment in the quiet office. Then she went back to work. The day Amara left was a Thursday in March. The apartment was on the third floor of a building in Capitol Hill. Small, a one-bedroom, the kitchen galley style and the windows looking at another building rather than at anything you'd call a view. But the lease had Amara's name on it, and only Amara's name, and the key was in Amara's hand, and these were not small things. Nia helped her carry 2 bags to the car. Amara had arrived with a backpack and a manila folder, and she was leaving with 2 bags, which was not an enormous accumulation, but was the right size for a beginning. Enough to start, not so much that the starting felt like a burden. They stood beside the car. The March air was cold with a quality of potential in it, the particular Seattle cold that is not winter's cold, but the edge of something changing. I'm scared, Amara said. She said it plainly, without apology, with the directness of someone who had learned that naming a thing accurately is more useful than managing how it appears. Yes, Nia said. That was the whole response. Amara looked at her. That's all you're going to say? Yes is the accurate answer, Nia said. You should be scared. You're doing something new. New things are scary. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. Amara looked at the building behind Nia, at the facade, the windows of the rooms that had held her for 4 months, the library window on the upper floor visible from the driveway. I used to think the goal was to not be scared anymore, Amara said. The goal, Nia said, is to do the thing while you're scared. Amara nodded slowly. She put the bags in the back of the car. She closed the hatch. She turned around and looked at Nia with the full, unguarded quality of a face that had stopped holding itself against anything. Thank you, she said. Not the social version. The real version. The one that costs something to say because it requires the acknowledgement of need, which is the thing people in difficult situations protect most fiercely and surrender most meaningfully. Nia held her gaze. Come back if you need to, she said. Not to stay, just to remember that this place exists. Amara got in the car. She drove away. Nia watched the car until it was gone. She stood in the driveway with her hands in the pockets of her coat, and she looked at the space where the car had been, and she let the specific quality of the moment settle. The leaving of someone who was leaving towards something, which was entirely different from other kinds of leaving, and which produced in Nia a feeling she recognized as the closest thing to satisfaction she had felt in years. Not happiness. Not the simple, uncomplicated version of that. Something denser and more durable. The feeling of having done something that was actually useful in a specific, verifiable way. That a person who had come through the door with nothing but a backpack and a folder of documents was driving away to a lease with her name on it and a job and a credit file that was moving in the right direction. It was enough. It was more than enough. She turned and went back inside. That evening, the house held its particular Thursday rhythm. The legal advocates' session had ended at 5. The workshop room was being reset for Friday morning. 2 of the residents were in the common room watching something on the television and talking over it the way people talk over things. They're only half watching. The comfortable overlay of domestic sound that the building had developed over the months, and that Nia had come to recognize as the sound of a building doing what it was supposed to do. She went upstairs after dinner. She walked past the guest suites, 6 occupied now, 1 open pending a new resident arriving Monday, and she stopped at the library. The door was open. The lamp on the reading table was on. Darlene had left it on after her afternoon visit, which she sometimes did, which Nia had never corrected because the lamp left on in an empty room made the library look the way libraries should look. Inviting, accessible, a place that was waiting to be used rather than preserved. Nia went in. She crossed to the window and stood looking at the water. Her mother's earrings were on her ears. She had worn them today, had put them on in the morning without consciously deciding to, the way you do things that have become ordinary, the way wearing her mother's earrings had become ordinary, which was the thing her mother had always intended and which had taken Nia until now to actually inhabit. The water was doing what it always did, moving without drama in the gray early dark, the far shore lights beginning to show, the whole surface in that state of constant quiet motion that looked like rest from a distance and was never actually resting. She thought about the night she had stood in this room's previous version, the master bedroom, before the renovation, and looked at the crimson robe on the door. She thought about the carry-on bag at her feet. She thought about Tae-jin's face when she said she was leaving, the particular quality of a man who had never expected to be surprised by the person standing in front of him encountering a surprise. She thought about the investor dinner room with the wilting centerpieces, and Tae-jin putting the pen to paper with the slowness of someone doing the hardest thing they'd ever done. She thought about the coffee shop doorway in February. "You look tired. Are you sleeping?" The 2-minute encounter that had taken more out of her than she had anticipated, and that she had absorbed over several days afterward, not with grief but with the particular complex attention that the remains of something real demand. She had not seen him since. She did not expect to see him. They moved through different portions of the city now, by design and by the natural drift of lives that had been deliberately separated. The governance committee sent reports through Malcolm. Raymond's office and Malcolm's office communicated with the efficient impersonality of institutions that have been set up to communicate without requiring the participation of the people at the center of the proceedings. It was a good structure. She had built it to be a good structure. She touched the earrings with one hand, a small, unconscious gesture. The gesture of someone checking that something is still there. They were there. She had gotten them back. She thought about what she had said to her mother's photograph months ago, in the first night of all of this. She had stood in the penthouse bedroom with the earrings in her hand, and she had felt the specific nearness of her mother in the way that the dead become near when you are in the middle of something they would have had opinions about. "I'll handle it," she had thought. Or said, she wasn't sure which. The line between thinking and speaking had been blurry that night, which was the effect of the particular kind of exhaustion she had been in. She had handled it. Not cleanly. There was no version of this that had been clean. But the things that needed to be done had been done, and the things that needed to be built were being built, and the thing that had needed to end had ended, not with the drama of explosion, but with the slower and more complete finality of a fire that burns until there is nothing left that it can use. She had stood in this marriage, in this building, in this life, carrying more than she had shown and protecting more than anyone had seen, and she had done that for reasons that were real, and that she had examined honestly enough to find both what was admirable in them and what had been a mistake. And she had left with one suitcase. And that had been enough. That had been exactly enough. The water moved outside the window. The lamp on the reading table made a small, warm circle. Somewhere downstairs, the two women in the common room laughed at something. Nia stood in the library and let the quiet of a Thursday evening in March settle over her like something deserved. She was 32 years old. She had a building full of women who were in the process of beginning. She had work that was actually useful in a specific, verifiable, human way. She had her mother's earrings and the trust her father had built, and the financial structure she had quietly constructed over years, and the absolute clarity, standing at this window in the room that had been the site of the worst night of the last decade, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not where she had planned to be, not where she had imagined at 24 or 28 or 30 that she would be, but where she was supposed to be, which is a different thing, a better thing, because it is the place you arrive at through the full, unedited experience of your actual life, rather than through the execution of a plan that the actual life, in its endless and necessary inconvenience, refuses to follow. She turned from the window. She looked at the room, the shelves, the books, the reading table, the 8 chairs, the lamp making its small, persistent light. She turned the lamp off. She walked out of the library and down the hall. She walked down the stairs and across the marble foyer. The foyer where Tae-jin had laughed and asked where she was going with one suitcase. The foyer where the carry-on bag had sat at her feet while her marriage ended. The foyer that was now the entrance to something entirely different, something that bore her name not because she had insisted on it, but because it was simply accurate. She walked to the front doors. She opened them. The night air came in, cold, real, carrying the smell of the water and the Douglas fir and the March dark that was full of the specific Pacific Northwest quality of something on the edge of changing. She stood in the open doorway for a moment. She did not look back. She did not look back because there was nothing behind her that she needed to verify. The building was behind her, and it was doing what it was supposed to do, and the women in it were doing what they were supposed to do, and the work was real, and the structure was sound, and everything that had needed to be finished was finished. Tejan was somewhere across the city in the ongoing and difficult work of becoming the person he had been capable of, all along without understanding the cost of that capability going unexercised. She wished him the work. She genuinely wished him the work. Theora was in Toronto, beginning from a lower position than the one she had occupied, doing the same kind of beginning that everyone does when the version of themselves they had been relying on turns out not to be the version that holds under pressure. Philip Wren and Cascadia Ridge were in the slow, grinding machinery of civil litigation, which was exactly where they belonged. Malcolm Vance was at home with his family. Darlene had left a lamp on in the library. Amara was in a new apartment with her name on the lease, driving toward a Friday morning at a job she had applied for herself. And Nia Holloway was standing in the doorway of the building that had always been hers, in the life that had always been hers, even when she had made it smaller than it was, in order to fit beside someone who never understood what he was asking her to diminish, and she was not angry, and she was not sad, and she was not finished. She was beginning, the same way Amara was beginning, the same way all of them were beginning. Not from nothing, because you never begin from nothing, but from everything that the hard thing had taught you, which is always, if you let it, more than enough to start. She stepped out onto the entrance. The front doors stayed open behind her for a long moment. Then the night air moved through them, and they drifted slowly closed, the way things close when the person who walked through them has already moved on and is not looking back and does not need to. The lights inside the building stayed on. The water moved. The Douglas fir stood in the dark the way old things stand, without effort, without performance, simply present in the way that things are present when their roots go deep enough. And Nia walked forward into the cold March night, not because she knew exactly where she was going, but because she had finally, completely, and without reservation, stopped being afraid of not knowing. That was enough. That was everything.